virtual wine dinner, so hopefully it's slightly smoother than the first one. But if you look at your chat box, I've got essentially the temperatures we're kind of seeking on the wines out there. So if you're sitting outside in this beautiful sunny day in Cincinnati or somewhere even warmer, you might want to keep the Pinot Noir in the fridge for a little while longer, just so that it doesn't warm up and get too hot on you. And we're pretty lucky. Chef made a great menu to go with our wines tonight. I was going to try to do a little bit of presentation. So please make sure you're enjoying wine and food. I believe the brie cheese is our first course. And I'll pull up, I guess it's a PowerPoint, and I'll try my best. I haven't done a PowerPoint presentation since I was a college professor, and that felt like a long time ago. So we have a celebration of Oregon going on today. And realistically, Oregon's probably my favorite place for domestic wine. I'm very partial to it. I've been out there a few times. I've seen just over 30 wineries and their vineyard sites. It's just a place that I enjoy visiting, and nice folks out that way. What you want to know is that while Willamette Valley is the coolest wine growing region in North America in many ways, it's not a cold wine growing region like you would expect in parts of Chile or France, or even to a lesser extent Germany, because they're warming up over there these days. What that does is it allows them to really shine with white wines and lighter red wines. They've really made their hay on Pinot Noir in Oregon in general. Most recent I saw on that were about 90% of the grapes planted in the Willamette Valley were still Pinot Noir, even though there's a lot of Pinot Gris and Chardonnay, fun things like Gewürztraminer and Gruner Veltliner and all kinds of things. But the primary ones you'll be dealing with are Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris, Chardonnay, and Riesling are really the core four grapes that they're doing in the Willamette Valley. All the wines tonight are from the Willamette Valley. And I guess I'll pop over to a map. You can always ask a question related to any of the slides as well. I remember that reading the slides is horrible, so I'm not going to do that to you. I'm going to assume you can read or ask questions. So if you look at our map here, you can see kind of a start.
Hey, J-Matt.
Go ahead.
J-Matt, sorry, we can't see your screen.
Oh, no. See, this is good. I don't know when you can or cannot see. Right. Share again.
There we go.
Hey, all right. Oh, well, that's good. That's better. Much better now. Okay, yeah, so I'll just leave this up a little bit. I was saying all of our wineries are in the Willamette Valley for this. Rogue Valley doesn't have a lot of distribution in the Midwest. It's a smaller wine growing region. They do a lot of weird, funky stuff. It's really cool, but it's maybe not as beaten path and comfortable for folks as the Willamette Valley, which is a pretty young wine region. If you don't know the history of that valley, here's a little nugget for you. This guy named David Lett, who went to UC Davis, which is America's premier wine college. If you like to study enology, you would probably want to go there. He wrote a thesis for his master's program on trying to grow the Pinot grape varietals in the coldest possible place that they could become ripe. And at this time, there was a little bit of wine grown in Washington, a very small amount, none commercial. And California had 100 years of history doing this. So he moved up to the Willamette Valley, specifically the Dundee Hills, and started planting vineyards in the late 60s. A couple years later, a few more families moved out there. And by the mid-70s, there were about a half dozen wineries producing really interesting Chardonnay, Riesling, and Pinot Noir and Pinot Gris. I say interesting because that's a polite way to say that it maybe wasn't awesome. They were really trying to figure out what grapes would work, what clones would work, how to plant, where to plant, and things like that. Very luckily, the Dundee Hills is one of the warmer spots in the Willamette Valley, because if you remember the 60s, it was a much cooler time, both culturally as well as weather-wise. And it was able to get the Pinot Noir ripe. And that winery is still in production. It's called Irie, and David's son, Jason, is taking over. And lovely wines, if you ever see those around the market, worth a shot. In fact, it was the first Pinot Gris planted outside of Europe in the whole world. So that's pretty neat. the original Vines Pinot is quite expensive and maybe worth a one-time treat. Just you've had something that old these days. So if we're looking at our map now, does everybody, or can somebody tell me they see this? Because I don't know who's all muted right now. We're still good.
Yep, we can see it.
All right, fantastic. So most of the wines we'll be dealing with here are going to be closer to Salem than Portland. Particularly the Pinot Gris that we're starting with, the Breeze Vineyard, is really just due west of Salem. There is a Van Duzer corridor, which is really a fancy way to say that there's a gap in the coastal range, and really cold air from the Pacific Ocean kind of cuts through that way. And really, if you're anywhere on that corridor and you're sitting out having a charcuterie board, enjoying a glass of wine, you pretty much get smacked in the face with cold air right around 5 p.m. every single day of the year. It's pretty interesting and pretty neat. What that does, though, is it allows these regions to cool off overnight, which helps the grapes retain their acidity, and it shuts them down so they don't produce too much sugar too quickly, which would make wine that is not very interesting. You would probably turn that into brandy or cooking wine if it was just really hot, like the San Bernardino Valley in California, which is where most of our lettuce comes from. They make really bad grapes there, too. And there's really 3 primary soil types in Oregon. If you all are really good history buffs and know all about the Missoula Floods, this will make a lot of sense to you. There's basically volcanic eruptions, and there is these massive floods. It's probably worth a Google search. I think there's like a PBS video on them that I watched a few months back that was really, the scale of it really is interesting. You know, they're called the Missoula Floods because basically from Missouri to the West Coast flooded like for tens of thousands of years over and over and over again. At any rate, for some interesting soils. So you have windblown stuff, which is laurelwood. You find most of that up near Portland, and then sedimentary and volcanic clay sparse throughout the valley. These different sub-appellations that you might see in the Willamette Valley are often dictated by different soil types. In fact, laurelwood just became an AVA 2 months ago, largely put on the docket by the Ponzi family, which is one of those families that moved and started making wine in the very early 70s. One of the pioneer families, if you will. But let's talk about Jovino and the Pinot Gris that you all are enjoying. It's lovely wine. This is a brand that is exclusive pretty much in Ohio and Kentucky. You don't see it in a lot of the rest of the country. It's made by Joe Dobbs Winery, and he is a passionate guy, loves wine. He's also a business person, so he makes a lot of wine you might have heard of for other people. For example, if you've ever had a canned wine from Underwood, Joe makes that wine for them, and some other folks in general. But the Jovino stuff comes from their Breeze Vineyard. So this is really a lot more control over vineyard sites. All the sourcing is his. He controls all of the farming techniques, when the harvest occurs, you know, how much grapes he needs to produce the quantity of wine he wants. He can then either make bulk wine and sell it off, or sell the grapes themselves, and really kind of hone in on really nice quality. Some of you might be asking what the difference is between Pinot Gris and Pinot Grigio. Just the language. One is French, one is Italian. Andy McVeigh is also the winemaker now for Joe, because he's now not a young man. And there's a little bit of his background there. But really nice, lovely wine. I think if you're doing Oregon, you really want to touch on the Pinot Gris and the Pinot Noir. It's really what brought the region fame and acclaim, and has made it a worthwhile kind of wine region, and really has helped the whole state of Oregon in many ways. So this is the Breeze Vineyard. So you kind of look off in the distance there, and that's that coastal range, and they've put a nice little Van Duzer corridor kind of coastal airflow diagram. I don't know what that's technically called, but if you look in the upper right-hand corner, that'll work for you. So about 214 acres, planted in 1987. Unfortunately, we would consider that an old vine. That would be old vines. When you get near 30 years, it's really considered mature vineyard sites. I say unfortunate because I don't know any of us are under 30. And but for vines, it's really good. It's really good, just like people. And 214 acres is a pretty large property, but it is not all planted to grapes. As you can see, there's some trees in there. They leave some stuff fallow, as well as they grow some hazelnut trees and Christmas trees on the property. If you didn't know, a lot of our Christmas trees come from the Willamette Valley. Strange things like that. I'm going to pause my sharing here, and I'll check some of the question logs and things like that. And yeah, that's kind of where we're at this point in the dinner. So if anybody wants to unmute and chime in, or we can all chat for a few minutes, that gives us a little bit of the intro to what we're talking about.
Hey, J-Matt, it's Ruthie.
Hey, Ruthie.
My daughter and I went to the Willamette Valley a few years ago, and it was one of the coolest. We were debating to go to Napa or Willamette, and we hit the home run with outside of Portland. It was
Yeah,
just beautiful.
Willamette Valley is really easy and accessible from Portland, and Napa's kind of Disney-fied at this point. There's nothing wrong with Disney. You just, if you know what you're getting into. Oregon's like farmers and people, and Napa is a lot more like salespeople and expensive real estate these days. Both make excellent wine, but I think the experience is going to be more enjoyable in Oregon in general. What'd you do? So how was pickup from the Phoenix? Did they do a good solid job making everything easy for everybody?
It was,
No, I can't.
for me, it was perfect.
I love it.
Yeah.
You want to try places?
Hey, Fred, come over here. We're talking about
It's like a party going on over there, huh?
Russell. We are socially distancing during our UnCorked event.
We are. See how far away I am?
We're 6 feet.
I'm waiting for Megan to get home to join me here. J-Matt, so the Phoenix had paired this with some shrimp, the Pinot Gris. What are some other suggestions that you'd recommend to pair food-wise with the Pinot Gris?
Really flexible. Yeah, Pinot Gris is pretty flexible, I think, as far as food pairings go. It's one of the more full-bodied white wines. I don't think it's as full-bodied necessarily as some Chardonnays you might see, but it's really flexible with a lot of different seafood that have some mass to them. Things like shrimp, typically, my experience, people are doing shrimp with either butter or like a cocktail sauce or something like that. There's a touch of residual sugar in this wine, just a little bit of sweetness. Not a sweet wine, but just a little roundness to it. So that's going to go really well with anything with a little bit of a spicy dip on it as well. I think Pinot Gris is really friendly with creamy cheeses. I love it personally with the artichoke kind of dip. It's probably like the least healthy green like food on the planet, but I love it. And I think just that creaminess goes really well together. I like it all by itself as an aperitif as well, for sure. That's a great question. Yeah. Oh, I think I see a good one here about the temperature. So, like, even though that Pinot Gris is really cold, it's going to hold flavors pretty well. Yeah. So if you cool a wine down, and we might have even talked about this last year at the dinner, what you're going to do is you're going to definitely reduce the aromatic intensity of it. And what you will do is you'll keep a little bit more acidity in the glass, or perceived acidity. You can't change the actual acidity of a wine by its temperature. And that's going to be pretty nice. And it'll also warm up in the glass pretty quickly. And that's something I like to see, is how these things change and they'll open up a little bit. The Stelvin enclosures are fantastic, or screw caps if you prefer. Sometimes those wines are a little bit tight because they haven't had as much oxygen on them. So like getting them open, getting them in a glass cold, letting it warm up slowly, those are nice things. Hypothetically, it's enjoyable when these things change in a positive way.
Hey, J-Matt. Oh, can I have a question? Sorry, Lauren.
You're good.
Hey, J-Matt, when you talk about temperature, I got some natural wines, which I think I totally get taken on because you can, from what I heard from our last Uncorked, natural really means nothing. But in terms of temperature, what should cold be and what should a red be? Because I know red should not be as warm as sometimes I think it should be.
Yeah, so there's not, I mean, really the right answer is really sounds like a cop-out. It's whatever you prefer the temperature to be. You know, if you like your wine warm, that's okay. If you like it really cold, that's okay too. I would say kind of the exceptions to that are sparkling wine. You want to start them really cold because it's easier to open the bottle and less likely to eye. So for me, I have a 2-zone temperature wine fridge at the house. I tend to keep the whites at 39 because I think there's a pretty big variance in this little cooler, and I tend to keep the reds around 55. Now, 55 to me is far too cold for big, bold reds like Napa Cab and Argentine Malbec and Amarone from Italy. But again, I think it's a lot easier to warm wine up just on a table or in a decanter than it is to cool it off. A lot of times I will often throw a white wine aperitif in the freezer for 15 minutes before I drink it, even when it's coming out of the refrigerator. That being said, I have an ice bucket too, so we can always put things in the ice bucket or take them out to keep the temperatures good. But yeah, so generally, you know, you don't necessarily need to keep your white wines like refrigerator cold. And I don't know how cold your fridges are. I think mine's around 42. So, you know, below 50 on whites and, you know, below 60 on reds is pretty safe. But if you get really big reds, I'd keep it below 65 if possible. That's really good. And then there's certain styles that benefit from a chill. Like if you've ever had a Gamay Noir from Beaujolais, the cru ones I think are really lovely, kind of more white wine temperature. Some sweet red wines I think really benefit from being chilled down. I have a favorite wine from Piedmont called Goulet, and it's a sweet red wine made from a Malvasia clone, and I like to drink it with a little bit of vodka and an ice cube even. It's fantastic. Good question. Good questions.
J-Matt, I was just going to say, when you were talking about pairing with the seafood, literally my roommate and I were just talking about how the wine would go great with seafood. So,
yeah. So the thing about wine is in America, we're really learning about the concept of pairing. You know, hopefully everybody's had a couple of experiences where they've gotten to do like a nice coursed out dinner where a sommelier or restaurant manager and chef were able to like put a menu together for you. Makes a really excellent experience. There are definitely wines that I do not like to drink that with the correct food are magical. I know if any of you have ever dined at Orchids, the former sommelier Charles Redmond, tall, skinny guy, if you remember him from several years back, he gave me like an extremely oaky, buttery Chardonnay, and I was really kind of looking at him cross-eyed. That's just not my personal style. And they brought it out with a chicken dish that had a little bit of smoke to it and a little bit of like a marmalade, mostarda to it from Todd Kelly when he was in town. And it was awesome together. It was fantastic, but I wouldn't ever choose to drink that wine. So it's pretty fun. You know, in Europe, they have this cliche about if it grows together, it goes together. And in the culture, they've just had wine on the table. I grew up pretty American. You know, a lot of my food was processed. My dad drank Stroh's. And yeah, even when we did have wine, it was usually at my grandmother's house, and it was really crappy Chianti in one of those wicker fiasco baskets, or you know, a big jug of Carlo Rossi or Franzi or something. Not that there's anything wrong with those wines; they're just not considered, you know, great pairing wines in general. See here, so look for Goulet.
We have a thing called an icicle that you put down into the bottle of wine. And then the wine comes through this part and it keeps it chilled. It works pretty well through the bottle.
Yeah.
He's answering some questions.
Are we gone?
Yeah, I'm giving you all the cocktail. So the Goulet is a slightly sweet red wine that has like a little touch of effervescence. So like it's like it looks like a red wine. Alcohol's way down at 5%, which is lower than even like German Rieslings. and it's got sweetness to it, but it has a lot of acidity. It's just like how the grape grows in this part of Piedmont. And I put an ice cube in it. I throw a little vodka in it because 5% alcohol is, that's about the strength of a Budweiser. So I'm a grown up. I can do a little bit more than that. And it's fantastic. I also add a little bit of orange bitters because I keep it in the house for cocktails, and it's just like lovely strawberry, rhubarb, orange cocktail wine thing, and I just love it. I love it because I like sweet things. I like dessert. I like sweet wines. I'm not saying I want to sit down and drink a sweet wine when it's 95 out on the patio, but in the right situation, it's pretty great.
J-Mo, we missed part of it. What do you do all that vodka and all that mixing with?
It's called Goulet. So, I did this internally. Hang on a second. I'm gonna try to do this for the group. Let me do it to everyone.
Yeah, it's not.
There we go. Let's see. And there's a recipe for everybody. Sorry, I had to chat with just Lauren. I was making sure my pacing was going okay. I don't like to rush anybody. So yeah. And I'm sure you could always ask, just like we talked about last time, if you go to an independent wine person, they'll probably hunt it down for you. You could probably even use certain sweeter style Lambruscos too. Would probably have a similar vibe to it. Something about those northern Italian, slightly sweet red wines. They make for good cocktail mixers. Yeah. All right, cool. Chimichurri, that looks delicious. Yep. So yeah, that's kind of that one. I guess I'll talk a little bit about Elk Cove, just so you all know. Don't feel like you need to, hurry up or slow down. But yeah, I'll try to pop up the slideshow again. Share content. All right. So Elk Cove Vineyards is the producer of the rosé that you all have in an ice bucket or in the fridge, or maybe now in your glass, or maybe you're planning on getting it in the glass right now. This is one of the oldest wineries in Oregon. It's located out in Gaston, and this, I think, is a beautiful drone shot of the original winery. And you can kind of see, that's that coastal range again. And if you look out to the very far right, that's the Pacific Ocean. Elk Cove was founded by Pat and Joe Campbell back in the late 60s. There was a herd of elk that bedded down with their slipstream trailer that they were living in, and that's where they got the name of the vineyard. Lovely people. And here's a whole bunch of technical data. They've got a lot more technical data out on their wine and on the vintage and whatnot. But realistically, I think the main things that you want to know is that it's pretty much produced from some really high quality fruit. Now, the Elk Cove Vineyards, if you see Elk Cove on their label, it's going to be all estate fruit now. So right now they have 6 vineyards under ownership, and then they also have these relationships dating back to the 70s where they get really killer fruit from their neighbors that they've been buying wine from forever. None of that makes it into the Elk Cove anymore. They created a second winery called Pike Road, which, I really haven't seen that locally either. I think you can get the Pinot at P.F. Chang's, I think. Regardless, Elk Cove wines are lovely. So what they do is they really utilize primarily their Richmond vineyard, which is it's gigantic. It's not all planted to grapes. And what they do is they use for the rosé a lot of their youngest vines, and they harvest it a little bit early. So the idea is that if you get it a little bit early, you're going to retain a little bit more acidity. And you can see there the vatting there is free run juice. So basically what they do is they don't even press the grapes to make the rosé. They just take the juice that runs off and they keep it in contact with the grape skins for the coloring. So it's basically, technically, I guess this could be like an orange wine, but it's not. It's rosé, where they kind of just make it like a white wine, where they just kind of like lightly let it all mellow out together. And it's fantastic. That harvesting it a little earlier also keeps the alcohol a little bit lower, which is pretty nice. They're on the second generation at Elk Cove also. You have Adam Campbell. He's a great guy. His son's really good at football. Silas is a good dude too. Love him, love them. They are moving all of their processes to be as consistent and as terroir driven as possible. That slide you saw previously with the soil types, this is from the Elk Cove Vineyards. They basically have a trilogy, and you can basically get single vineyard wines from them and taste them all from the same vintage and see how those soils are very interesting as far as like how they change. Just like they grow everything the same, they make the wine the same, and just the soil differences are exceptional there at Elk Cove. It's pretty fantastic. And yeah, it's fantastic stuff. As far as rosé goes, pairing wise, and here's like a little idea there of the estate vineyard. Rosé is pretty fantastic. It's kind of like ketchup, or something really basic that you could use on everything. It's got more acidity than red wine. It's got more body than white wine. It tends to go with foods that are not very pairing friendly, like tomatoes and asparagus. It's a pretty nice thing. In this case, I think there's a lot of melon on the wine itself, and I'm pretty sure that there's some melon in your like with your cheese and whatnot on the pairing with chef, and that's a pretty smart decision. And it holds up to fennel. I have a keen sense for fennel, and rosé is an excellent match with that. In fact, sometimes if we ever do like stuffed shells, we sometimes have too much fennel because we haven't updated our recipe card, and we end up going with rosé instead of a red wine, even though it's like a ricotta dish. So yeah, let's see here. And that's kind of the jazz on that. So this is made from Pinot Noir as well, just so you know what grape you're getting into here. And yeah, that's the rosé from Elk Cove Vineyards. One of my favorite places. Cool.
I was gonna say, I typically don't like rosés, but I really do like this one.
That's awesome.
I feel like it's not as sweet as some of the other ones that I've had.
Yeah, so let's talk about that, because there's this thing called white Zinfandel, and it happened on accident, and it kind of really hurt Americans' interest in pink wine for, I don't know, a generation and a half. So there's this guy, Joel Peterson, who is making Zinfandel in Oakley, which is like in central southern California. And he had what's called a stuck fermentation. So basically a stuck fermentation is when the yeast dies before the fermentation completes. So what you get is the sugar stops converting to alcohol. So all of a sudden he had a Zinfandel that had pretty moderate alcohol, a lot of sugar, and it was pink because a lot of the fermentation helps draw the color out of the grape skins. And back then, there wasn't a lot of great technology to restart a ferment, and it also cost a lot of money. So basically, he bottled everything and tried to sell it. And for better or worse, people absolutely loved white Zinfandel, so it became a thing. Unfortunately, there's not really a lot of quality white Zinfandel out in the world, and a lot of people got kind of hip to pink wine doing that. And I've had plenty of white Zinfandel in my day too. I'm not criticizing anybody's taste, but again, it's not rosé. It's just like we call it like a blush, I think is the term they're using these days. And it's sweet and it's easy to drink. I'm not gonna lie to you, when I lived in Central Texas, I would do a cheese board and some ice cubes and a white Zinfandel, and felt like 200 degrees sunny heat. It was really refreshing and nice for a little while. And then
Right.
it was not so much. But yeah, rosé should be dry. It really should be, and dry just means no sugar, no sweetness. And it really makes it really food friendly. It's just a lovely thing to do. What you'll find though is a lot of different winemakers will cover and mask a lack of quality with a little bit of sweetness. So if you have a little bit of a flaw in there, you can leave a little sugar in it, and the sugar will become the dominating feature of the wine, which can hide flaws. I mean, somebody mentioned natural wines earlier. Yeah, there's no legal definition for it. I love natural wines, but Not all of them. I just like good wines, and if they're made naturally, that's great. I think it's more of a marketing term than it is has real meaning. You know, I'd rather hear like, are they trying to make the wine in the vineyard, or are they trying to make the wine in the winery with chemicals and tricks and, you know, like technology? I'd rather have somebody grow really good grapes and maybe not have a complex winemaking process.
Right.
For me, that's really worked out over tasting over the years. So that's kind of it. But yeah, rosé can be great. And yeah, somebody said they had a great one in France. Yeah, the French do really good rosé, and they drink a lot of it too. Elk Cove does a lot of other varieties. So the primary production is Pinot Noir, and I would say that they do a lot of Pinot Gris. They do amazing Riesling. I had a 1974 Riesling 2 years ago from Elk Cove, and it was still lively and vibrant and extremely delicious. They do a sparkling rosé as well as the rosé, but they grow other things on the property. So I think their Pinot Gris has like a little splash of Gewürztraminer in it, like 1% of it or something. So they have a little bit of this and that going on, but the core of their winery is all about, Elk Creek is in Indiana on the way to Indianapolis. Very different winery. Very lovely, nice folks, but again, maybe not fine wine. It's a little bit more regional and whatnot. So, yeah, I would definitely look for their single vineyards. That's really their showcase now, is if you see a Roosevelt Vineyard or a La Boheme, Clay Court, Mount Richmond, these are very serious, collectible, ageable kinds of things. They're really lovely. And I personally love their Riesling. I think it's an absolute showstopper. Oh, and they make Pinot Blanc, and that's delicious too. And we talk about that a little bit. So we started with a Pinot Gris. We're going to have a Pinot Noir Rosé and a Pinot Noir, just a Rouge, coming up next. They're all basically the same plants that changed colors a little bit. So think of them as siblings or really close cousins. So essentially, Pinot family of grapes, it mutates really easily in nature. It's just one of those plants that wants to change. So Pinot Blanc just means white. Pinot Noir just means black. Pinot Gris means gray. And that's really what the colors of the grapes are. Pinot Noir is a dark red, black grape. Pinot Gris is gray, and Pinot Blanc is green, which we would consider white in wine world, because, you know, the words never make sense. That's the beauty of wine, is you can say whatever you want, and maybe it's true. Yeah. Any other questions? So hopefully you're enjoying it. I know a lot of people haven't had serious rosé. This is a really high quality rosé. So hopefully you're all enjoying that. Yeah. All right. So I got from Robert, rosé and the bad rap. Yeah, so that was really, it has to do with white Zinfandel. You know, it's just like you get to taste Elk Cove right now. It's rosé, and it's bright, and it's fresh, and it's floral, and it has good weight to it, and it has a decent amount of alcohol in it, and it's really going well with your food, hopefully, at this point. That's not what white Zinfandel is. White Zinfandel is basically Kool-Aid with a little bit of alcohol in it. It's sweet, it's cloying, it's not very interesting, you know? So, yeah, it's interesting. But yeah, and like, I just think, yeah, I can share the PowerPoint. Absolutely. For sure. And yeah, that's kind of the bad rap on it. You know, it's Americans couldn't really mentally transition from blush to rosé because they were the same color wine. You know what I mean? It's taken us a generation. Really, I think it started when we started getting amazing chefs. You know, when people were really, really making fine dining and the cuisine level started to come up, you know, the chefs were like, we got to have better wine. A lot of French immigrants, like locally here, Jean Robert was really important to the wine scene because his food goes better with wine than other beverages. And that's really what happened. You know, the chefs kind of brought food into the home. You know, you start with Julia Child, get into the Food Network and stuff like that, you know. At one point, it was no longer, you know, a family travesty when children wanted to become a chef. That's moving into the sommelier world now, where it's a little bit more specialized and beverage centric, and it's really just about enhancing the experience. But in Europe, they've basically had this since the French Revolution, when they killed all the aristocrats and all these servants had nowhere to utilize their skills. That's really where restaurants were born. It's really spread culturally. It really did start in France. I mean, I know they're really proud of their wine and their food, but largely we have a lot to owe food-wise, culinary-wise, worldwide for the French. Mm-hmm. Hooray! All right. Oh, I finally figured out grid view. Now I can see all of you at once.
J-Matt, we love this one. 6 of us, thumbs up. Thumbs up.
This
We
is
love
so
it.
good. It's
So good.
I love this.
Excellent. Well, I blame Chef because I knew the wines were good.
I also
And if they go together, then it makes everything better. The beauty of a rosé is it can be an aperitif, which means you can drink it without food. That's basically what aperitif means to me, is a drink you can have without food. And when you are doing it with food, though, like a wine that doesn't pair well can really be detrimental to the experience. When I was at Boco, what we would often do as servers, particularly new young servers that were training, we would put one of our classic dishes down, whether it was like the crudo or like the scallop Brussels sprout salad, and we'd give them like the pairing, like selected by the sommelier, and then we would give them like the absolute worst pairing possible from our glass pour list, just to show them how bad it could be if you don't line things up. And realistically, grew up on pairing rules like white wine with fish, red wine with meats. Really, that's a little out of date at this point. You want to focus your structure on your pairing. So think of it this way: if I was going to sell you 2 different Pinot Noirs, and I asked you if you wanted one to taste like cranberries or strawberries at dinner, and there was a minor difference, it wouldn't really help you make a decision, I imagine. But if I talked about one being a little bit higher in alcohol, a little bit more structured with tannin, which is what makes your mouth feel dry, a little bit more delicate acidity, means doesn't make your mouth water as much. And then I were to say, well, this one's really a lot leaner, it's brighter, it's fresher, it has a lot more acidity, the tannin is really dialed back, you can make a decision based on what you're eating, right? If you're having salmon or a salad, you'd probably want to go with that lighter one. And if you're having a cheeseburger, you'd want to go with the heavier Pinot Noir, right? So the structure is far more helpful when it comes to pairing than flavor. All wine should taste like fruit. I know it's kind of corny to say it smells like grapes, but it's made from grapes. And structure, I think, is far more important in the pairing process. Maybe I can find that too. Maybe I can send that out. Let me see if I can find a file. I got a cheater file. I have my computer. This is fun. Perfect. Let's see. Now I go here. Now I go here. Now I go here. And hey, there you go. There is my pairing guide that I wrote up for every restaurant I've ever worked at. And I can share this too, so you can put this on your fridge or something like that. All right. Yeah, I'll email that out if you all want that. That's a pretty easy thing to do these days, I think.
Yeah, JMatt, if you want to send the PowerPoint, well, you send that one to me, but if you want to send that other document you just had, I can make sure that everyone gets it.
Yeah, I'm actually trying to do that right now because, you know, the best thing for my brain is to not have to remember.
Perfect.
It's really lovely when all I need to do is just do things, you know? So,
Yep.
all right. It's called a pairing guide PDF. It is now sent. Cool. Awesome. Yeah, so that's kind of fun. Just to think about it that way, you know, like in the world of culinary curiosities and how you want to design, you know, typically food comes first and then you match a wine to the food. That's really easy at a restaurant when there's 200 options for wines. You know, I think at home it's often a little bit easier to go the other direction. You say, oh, I got this bottle. It was a gift. Somebody got me this beautiful right bank Bordeaux. I know it's got Merlot and probably some Cabernet in it. It's going to be medium plus weight. Yeah, maybe some lamb or some wild boar or a gamier fish, gamier poultry dish. You know, that might all pan out really nicely. That being said, I think everybody should have at least 200 different wines in their homes. You know, just in case there's a quarantine and you can't leave for a month, you really want to make sure you have a little bit of a stock because it'd be very dangerous to get dehydrated. So yeah. All right. Well, I suppose we could talk about the Pinot Noir as well. So let me get this going again. And where are your technology? There we are. And we will share our all about John Groeschel. Cool. All right. And the PowerPoint is. So we're talking about Groeschel cellars now. This is something I'm really excited about as far as our opportunity to have it in market and what John's doing. So the wine you have right now is called Commuter Cuvée. If you just pulled it out of the fridge, you're probably going to be okay in like 10 minutes because it's probably hot and humid where you are too. So John is great. He's coming to Cincinnati on average every 6 months since we started importing the wine. And I know it's funny to call it an import, but that's how the trade laws work in America. These are all imported wines. And he's great. So essentially what you get from him is somebody who wants to do lots of really cool things. So he is growing like Melon de Bourgogne and Tempranillo, and he's getting all kinds of things that are traditional for to pay his bills. So what he has done is he has designed Commuter Cuvée to be an extremely high quality $20 Oregon, actually Willamette Valley appellated Pinot Noir. $20 is a really challenging price point for quality in Pinot Noir, and I think that he does a masterful job with it. Pinot Noir is often a little bit more expensive. If you didn't know, you get less fruit per ton, like less acreage. I should say. You get less tons per acre than you do with other things. Like Pinot Gris, you can get 7 or 8 tons out of a hectare, and in Pinot Noir, you can often be between 1.5 and 3 tons. So your Pinot Gris can literally be half as expensive and have a very similar quality level. Cabernet is fairly prolific as well. You know, you're really solid going to get a lot more than 5 tons per hectare. So one of the main contributing factors to the expensive Pinot is it's pretty hard to grow, and it is not prolific in the vineyard. It's pretty uninspiring if it is. So yeah, so this is going to be Commuter Cuvée. So John basically was a professional bike rider in France. And if you do that for long enough, I think you get hooked on wine. And when he came back to Portland, Oregon, he wanted to be a winemaker. So he basically did it. And it's fantastic. He's such a humble guy and really technical and knowledgeable. And I think just so interesting. And I don't know. I like a lot of people from Oregon. He's one of them for sure. For sure, absolutely. Yeah, so Pinot Noir is also extremely food friendly, largely due to the elevated acidity. Most high quality Oregon Pinot Noirs don't see a ton of oak. They usually see a little bit. I kind of think of it more like the underwire of a Brau, as opposed to like the Brau itself. Like so in like Napa or in Bordeaux, they might like hammer the wines with oak to like give it a lot more structure. Cab holds up better to those things, so it might be like the whole brazier. But Pinot Noir doesn't need that. It's really elegant and light and finessed. So it's just a little bit of an addition, an extra layer, if you will. And food-wise, very few things pair better than Pinot. It can go with heavier fish dishes. It can go with meaty dishes. I personally love it with, I really, really love it with salmon. I love it with cheeseburgers. It's my favorite cheeseburger pairing. And cheeseburgers might be my favorite food because apparently I still eat like I'm 3 or 4 years old. And that's okay too. But yeah, so that's kind of the jazz on it, right? So the vintage you're consuming is pretty safe. Oregon has had really strong vintages really for several years in a row. They have been really lucky as far as not getting too much rain near harvest. Not since 2013, which is 7 years ago already at this point. You know, they've been having these hot, dry summers, but because they get so much rain in the winter, they have these water tables. So if the vineyard can get access to deep waters, oh yes, absolutely, with the Blue Bock mac and cheese. I personally like to get the extra powder cheese to add. I like to double the cheese on that. It's really delicious. Yeah, so depending on where you live too to get these wines, I always tell everybody, go to your local shop and tell them what you'd like. Say, hey, I did a wine dinner. This guy from Cutting Edge was in there, and I like this Commuter Cuvée. A lot of shops can get a bottle in a couple of days usually. They can get a whole case. It's even easier for them. Personally, if you're on the east side of town, you're pretty much always safe going to Piazza di Sepoli or to Hyde Park Gourmet or the Wine Merchant. If you're farther north, you got a bottle or two or O'Brien's. If you're in Kentucky, you're usually pretty safe at Depths or Party Source. If you're downtown, and I cannot remember the name of his wine shop, it's on Main Street in between 6th and 7th. He's really great. And I cannot believe I cannot remember his name right now or the name of the shop. It's between 6th and 7th on Main Street. And yeah, if you're on the west, yes, Corkopolis, that's the one. Fantastic. They're really good.
Piazza di Sepoli is on the west side too. White Oak.
Yes, the White Oak one is up there, and they'll totally have it up that way too. And I would say that's pretty much it, because I'm pretty sure Wyoming Wines closed last year. That was probably the best wine shop. Confused by the east-west nature when it's really all east and a little bit north, but that's okay. And yeah, that's pretty safe. If you get really far out, you can a lot of times get it at a restaurant. So if you live like far outside of the 275 loop, go to a fine dining restaurant and say, hey, can you get some of this? Like if you're really far northwest, I know Cozy Cafe has access to these things. And if you're up in Dayton, the Dorothy Lane Market does. By the way, the Dorothy Lane Market is an awesome grocery store if you're ever up that way. If there's ever baseball again and you can catch a Dragons game, check out Dorothy Lane Market. But yeah, I think also you can get these things through the Phoenix, particularly after like piggybacking off a dinner like this. If you ever really liked anything from the dinner, just have yeah, like I would just reach out to Lauren and say, hey, reach out to Lily and see, and then pick them up that way. That's always an easy way to do it too, particularly coming off a dinner where everybody's already kind of got it on the top of the mind. For sure, for sure. All right, grid view again. So yeah, so hopefully you like the commuter cuvee. I think that again, at $20 retail price point is extremely challenging to get something that tastes like Pinot Noir. You can get wine and it can be good, but it's a challenging price point. Oh, I'm originally from Chicago. I moved to Cincinnati from Baghdad, Iraq, and went to Xavier for graduate school. That's where I did my master's degree. And then I met a girl, and we got married, and now we have 2 kids and a little bungalow in Hyde Park. In fact, I just heard Thatcher screaming because it's probably bedtime. He's probably going upstairs to brush his teeth and shower. We should do this every night. Then I don't have to do any of the toddler stuff. That'd be great. That'd be great. We'll make Lindsay do it all. Yeah, what other kind of wine things you have? So I know we talked a little bit about natural wine. That's like a really it's a really important issue to me because I really want things that are farmed sustainably, and I don't like a ton of chemicals in what I consume unless I'm trying to consume chemicals. You know, I occasionally enjoy a cigar, and occasionally, you know, sometimes there's a little Advil in my world. But for the most part, you know, we put so much effort into sourcing good peppers and tomatoes and lettuce when we're cooking at home, and then a lot of it's lost on beverages. It's like the great frustration of a wine salesman in America is going into the neighborhood bar that is like farm to table kitchen, amazing craft beers, a few really good house cocktails, and then garbage wine that is made in a factory. And I can never understand what the disconnect is, why wine is kind of left out of that thought. Like, and a lot of the success I've had locally is like helping people like Habits in the brew house, like not have a horrible wine list, because it doesn't have to be expensive to be good. Let's see. So I am drinking Pinot Gris from Oregon. It is the Breeze Vineyards, and the vintage is 2018. I forgot to grab bottles, and because of the coronavirus, we're not allowed to go to the warehouse anymore because we're not supposed to touch anything or see any human beings ever again. So I just had to go with what was in the personal stash. So, and I wanted to be on Team Oregon for our dinner tonight. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. So I'm looking here, and it seems like prime rib.
And your variation.
Hey, Jay, so the natural wines that I got, I still have 2. Now I have 4 bottles left. The first one was a red, which I liked. The white was a little goofy to me. I tried to warm up to it, but it was hard. But it's the company that I bought them from. It's called Dry Wines Farm. And if you Google them, they are exactly what you described. Conservative. They're trying to make good wine, but not using as much water and the things that you would expect.
Mhm. Yeah. So every different place is going to require different things, right? So probably my favorite winemaker in the whole world is a man named Franz Weninger, and he is an Austrian winemaker, and he makes what I would consider natural wine. He does a lot of biodynamic, but not all of them. He does a lot of organic, but not all of it. He has vineyards in Austria as well as Hungary, because he's it's like right on the border there, the Burgenland. And he grows different things in different places because of the climate, or the micro weathers, if you will. And like how he basically explained it is, if you were to go to like the major wine colleges of the world, I mentioned UC Davis, maybe Stellenbosch in South Africa, the University of Bordeaux. There's really famous one in Adelaide, Australia. There's really great wine colleges all over the world. And they will literally all have a textbook on like how to make wine. And every country has completely different numbers on things like sulfur, when you should harvest, how many bricks should it have, how much pH should it have. And basically he said, he's like, well, like, so in Austria, let's say we want to put, 22 micrograms of sulfur in, right? But then in, Georgia, which is where the first oldest wine grapes in the whole world are, they say it's got to be 100 micrograms. And in the United States, if you want it to be certified, it needs to be under 5 micrograms. So there's really, he's like, why don't you just do what's best for you in your vineyard? And that's, I think that's how natural wine started. And then it became a marketing term, and then it had a buzz, and then it was something you could sell, and it kind of shifted away, right? Like, you can get organic produce at Kroger, and you can get organic produce at Whole Foods, and you can get organic produce at Fresh Market. It's always the best at Fresh Market. Like, they always have the best, like they really do. And I don't know how. It's all organic, but like, heck, who knows? Maybe those red peppers are coming from 2 fields over. I don't know. I don't know what they're doing, right? So it isn't about bearing the cow's horn on the moon cycle with, poop in it in the vineyard that makes the wine good. It's not, a lot of it is, probably, oh my gosh, I got this weird pest. Maybe I should grow lavender because I don't want that pest around. Like this year in my balcony, I've got citronella planted with rosemary and mints, and mosquitoes hate all of those things. And I've had no mosquitoes in my backyard. Good for me, right? I don't like mosquito bites. So that's good, but like, I don't know. I always come back to this thing, and education's always a little different state by state, but like we learned about the 3 sisters around Thanksgiving every year in Illinois, and basically it was what the native population was growing. So they'd be growing like soybeans and corn and like gourds or pumpkins or some kind of other root vegetable. And essentially is they wouldn't grow like a field of soybeans and a field of corn and a field of pumpkins. They would literally plant all of these things right next to each other, because one took nitrogen out of the soil and one put nitrogen into the soil, and one took this bromine out of the soil. So basically they were all complementary plants. Now, if you're trying to feed an army, literally or figuratively, depending on how much history you want to get into, it's hard to do that, to harvest that. That's like more local farming. Like you could do that in your backyard, and you could have amazing corn and tomatoes and gourds and soybeans, but it's very hard to like harvest with a big tractor that, you know what I mean? It doesn't work because you got different plants and things like that. So it's challenging, and I feel like they learned about crop rotating in the earliest 20th century, where they would leave a field fallow, or they would grow soybeans one year in the field and corn the next. It's basically the same principle. So if you're going to grow vines, hopefully for 30 to 80 years in one spot, maybe what you do is you grow wild grasses in between, and chamomile flowers and lavender and chicory and other things that are going to put stuff in to the ground, and that way you don't need to fertilize. Or if you do fertilize, maybe you're using the poop from your goats and cows that are walking around your vineyard site, because it is a farm. Yeah, cool. Yeah. Oh, there's some such cool stuff here. I'm reading some questions now because I was on like a rant and I totally got behind here. Yeah. So if you don't know about like, well, Catawba was the grape for Longworth. So if any of you ever building where everybody tailgates just west of downtown, that's Longworth Hall. So Longworth used to own what we now call Mount Adams. So Mount Adams used to be all vineyards. And the primary grape was Catawba, and it was made into sparkling wine. And at one point, Cincinnati was the second most popular sparkling wine producing region in the world after Champagne. What happens, as often happens in urban areas, is the real estate prices got so expensive it wasn't worth farming anymore. And I'm sure all of you have seen some nice real estate on Oregon Avenue looking over downtown Cincinnati when you get a 3,000 square foot condo for $3 million. I would rather have 200 wines in my basement. Personally, you gotta do you, right? So yeah, like Cincinnati was a really major wine growing region a couple hundred years ago, 150 years ago. And there is wine grown locally. Some of it is good. I think the best local alcoholic beverage that isn't beer, because there's a lot of good beer in Cincinnati, is from Vineyard Valleys. They're mead. So they make mead from honey that they grow on site, or bees produce rather, it's not grown. That mead, they make like 6 of them. They're amazing. Their wines, however, are not very interesting to me. They're just a little bit simple, a little bit sweet. There's like a winery in Deer Park I've been to. They're really nice in there as well. Same kind of principle. Norton, Catawba, those grapes are, I think, better made to jellies and jams. You know, just like Concord, like that classic Concord purple jelly, that's made from a grape too. That's a different species of grape though. So all the grapes you have are Vitis vinifera, which is the European species of grape. And we're talking about Vitis lambrusca in America. So that's going to be things like Norton, Catawba, Concord, etc. Bacchus Noir is a pretty common one in Kentucky and Tennessee. And we make a lot of fruit wine in the States too, like peach wine, and strawberry wine. You ever been to Tennessee? You can try every kind of fruit wine ever. And it's really fun until it isn't, because you're saturated with sugar. Great barbecue and music though. I'll take, and whiskey. They do those things really well. So yeah, that's great. That's great. So yeah, I think actually if you ever go jogging in Mount Adams, I think there's a plaque near a water fountain you can find where it talks about it being a vineyard site. I don't know if there's anything at Longworth Hall about that, but yeah, sparkling wine here was a pretty big deal. There is a winery near the Rhinegeist Brewery and over the Rhine called Skeleton Key, and they have started making a sparkling Catawba from local grapes. I have yet to try it. I hope that it's awesome, because I think it's history, and history to me is interesting. For sure, for sure. So yeah, ask away, questions, join the chat. I'm done talking. We can all talk over each other. It'll be great. Oh, cool. Right on. Right on.
J-Matt, there was a question in the chat about just some wine spots like downtown to recommend. I mean, I think that you mentioned some of them. You've talked about wine shops around the city, but
yeah, so
recommendation?
Like a place to grab a drink. Downtown's a little tricky, you know. To me, downtown seems like places are really amazing at lunch, or they're kind of more like fine-ish dining dinner. And what I've seemed to find is that if they're really not more on the high-end wine side, so think Boca, Mitas, Orchids, formerly L, which no longer exists, unfortunately. Like those places had really strong wine lists. But a lot of the downtown seems to have really shifted heavily into craft wine, or craft beer rather, and cocktails. Yeah, so Over the Rhine's different to me. Yeah, so like 1215 is awesome. Danny over at Pleasantry is fantastic. Definitely I would hit Salazar up for wine. Emmy at the Mercer's really good at wine. When Lindsay Furia comes back from paternity leave, Pep and Dolores will be spot on again with their wine program. Nicola's has one of the deepest wine cellars in the country. Like it's almost as big as my house. It's amazing. It's like the entire second floor of that building. It's crazy how awesome. It's temperature controlled. It's beautiful. I could die there happy, maybe, as I'm kind of thinking about it. You know, if you just wanted to bar and bottle on Main Street is probably the best wine bar in town. It's Tom Stevens. He's fantastic. It's very craft beer and wine centric. He only marks up $5 over retail for a bottle of wine, so it's one of the least expensive places to get a quality wine to drink. Yeah, there's some places like the Anchor used to be great. They're gone. Like this COVID has really shut a lot of places down that we hope are coming back. It's just we don't know. We don't know yet. But yeah, I would say those are pretty safe. I go to Nicola's, the Mercer, Liberty's Bar and Bottle, Salazar, 1215, Pleasantry. Yeah, those are all pretty good. Transept, which I know is more of a wedding venue, but it has a bar. That they've got some good wine in there. Oh, how could I forget? It's always fantastic is Abigail Street. That's a good wine spot. Dan really makes a lot of good food for wine. If you're closer to Findlay Market, definitely would check out Social OTR when they reopen. Personally, I want to support them anyway because it's a functioning culinary school. So like they work with people at the summit and give them practical experience and help people get jobs. So that's always nice to me when you can kind of pass on tools and skills to people. Obviously, Market Wines is great too, and Over the Rhine. Those guys are great in there. At Findlay Market. Oh, the Rhine. The Rhine's a cheese shop, but it's fantastic. But they got a great wine selection. And Ruthie, that's like really good natural wine. Like not the garbage natural wine. Like they only do natural wine at the Rhine, but they taste it all and it's all amazing.
Really?
Yeah.
You mean it's not a marketing ploy?
That's right. And Stephanie also owns Oakley Wines. So like if you're around Oakley, it's the same owner as the Rhine. Like that's probably she's pretty awesome.
Okay, that's good to know.
You'll also find a lot of esoteric stuff at that spot too, because it's not all going to be basic Chardonnay, basic Cab, basic Pinot, basic Malbec. It's everybody loves New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, but I mean
That's good to know. He was talking about J Matt at our which I alluded the professor when I mentioned that I had purchased a case of natural wine, and he was very nice. Because he could have said you totally were just taken. But he said that there's really not rules about what are natural or organic. But he did talk about the things that you did. And when I researched Dry Wine Farms, which is where I bought it from, they do have a good reputation in terms of they're trying to be organic and to use the land and the water appropriately. That's really the gig.
Yeah, so the thing
you still gotta be able to drink it, J Matt.
Yes. It's got to be good wine first, and then you could, yeah, it's got to be good. I mean, like that. If you don't enjoy it in the glass, what's the point? What's the point? But yeah, so the thing about the dry farming in the water is that, and there's a lot of times I don't know if this is just people's like, hey, I've been doing this for 50 years. This is my observation. There's not like a lot of science on this, but a dry farm vineyard is usually a good thing. It's usually a good thing, and they tell me this is why. If you're not irrigating and you don't have a lot of rain, it forces roots to go deeper to find groundwater. As your root systems are deeper and more complex, you have less variance in water year to year. So the plant is more consistent, right? Like if any of you have ever had sod that first year, you're like, please don't die. I got to water it every 3 weeks because I got to get some roots going. And then after you've had that sod for 5 years, you're like, oh man, I got to dethatch this thing. There's too much going on, right? Same principle, right? Also, if you have too much water, your grapes have too much water in them and they don't have enough sugar and acid, which is what eventually becomes acid and alcohol, which is what makes wine fun, right? So if you are dry farming, that hypothetically means you've got a complex root system that is drawing from the terroir, the magic wine word saying buy stuff because I can't explain it to you. And what it really means is it's going to make you stable year to year. You're going to have less vine failure, and you're going to have more consistency year to year, which as a farmer is lovely. Some variance in wine, but knowing that you're not going out of business is pretty great too. In my opinion, that's what I would believe that if you were doing something like farming. Yeah. I missed the Anchor too. That place was awesome. Let's see. So yeah, and a lot of Elk Cove, what they'll do, for example, is when they plant new vineyards, they will do drip irrigation for the first 2 to 3 years to help the roots establish. And then anything that's over 3 years old hasn't seen irrigation in decades. Oregon is only really raining in the winter, so they're not getting any water during the growing season. So it's all coming from groundwater. And that's usually the hardest thing in Oregon is to source water rights. Like you can go find a beautiful hill and plant a vineyard, but if you don't have groundwater or water rights, you're set up for failure. And vineyards are unfortunately quite expensive to plant these days. So yeah, that's that. Yeah. Yeah. 12:15 has really good coffee too. That's always nice. Okay.
J Matt, we have another question in the chat.
Yeah. Oh yeah, blended wines. I'm gonna put this up. Can you all see the biodynamic versus traditional infographic thing I just pulled up?
Yep.
Excellent. All right. So blended wines are amazing. All right, so like first of all, most wines are blended. And when I say most wines, I mean like 90% of the wines that you've ever seen, even if it says fill in the blank grape on the label, are blended. When we were talking about structure, when we were talking about pairing, blending fixes that. The most classic example, excuse me, of a blended wine is Bordeaux. And the two most common grape varieties you're going to see in Bordeaux are Merlot and Cabernet Franc. So if you have any wine that you can splash into your mouth right now, and you want to get a kind of a sense of the structure, you want to swish it around and let it hit every surface, right? And then just breathe and pay attention to what's getting reacted. So like the Pinot Gris I have is making my mouth water. That's telling me that it's pretty high acid. And it's got a lovely kind of upper fleshy part of my mouth richness to it. And I can actually get a little bit of heat coming off of it. It's a pretty high alcohol white wine. That's all structure, right? Those are things. If you had a glass of 100% Cabernet Sauvignon and you did that, your whole mouth would be invigorated with feeling, except for the very middle of your tongue. We call it a donut. Cabernet structure is a donut. Usually only find 100% Cabernets from Washington State. So if you're looking to try this out, look for a 100% Cabernet from somewhere in Washington. If you were to drink a Merlot, it's the exact opposite. It's extremely rich and plush on the center of your palate. It is a donut hole. So if you add a little bit of Merlot to your super expensive Napa Cabernet, like literally 1 to 3%, it will fill in and make the structure completely balanced in your mouth. If you have, and I sell a couple of these amazing examples of 100% Cabernets from Washington, there's just a gap in the middle of the palate, and it's very frustrating. And it's fixed by blending. A lot of times, grapes will do different things too. So another very common blending region is like Côte-d'Aron in France, one of my favorite regions. There's often Grenache, Syrah, Mourvèdre, and Cinsault in there. They all do very different things, and they all grow differently too. So like, based on the weather, maybe Syrah does really well one year, and the Côte-d'Arons are a little bit bigger, bolder, juicier, and spicier. Maybe some years the Grenache does really well. So the wines are really, really high and acidic, and they're really punchy and fruity. And sometimes it's Mourvèdre, and they taste like strawberry, and it's amazing. That almost never happens, unfortunately. And then the Cinsault is extremely consistent every single year. So if you have a little bit of Cinsault in your vineyard in Côte-d'Aron, you can get that like, hey, I know 15% of my grapes are going to be really consistent year over year. It'll help me get like a house style. And usually Gergique is the word people use for Cinsault, which is, I think, a very French term for it smells kind of like the bushes and vines your neighbor didn't trim back. So yeah, that's all right, cool. So blending is fantastic. Yeah, so Quilt to me, well-made wine. And that's always the thing, right? Like, my tastes are mine, and my tastes seem to change on me every couple of years. Like, if you had done this tasting with me like 10 years ago, I would have been a much bigger fan of huge bombastic wines. 10 years ago, I was drinking a lot of heavily extracted oaky Zinfandel, California proprietary blends like the Prisoner. Like those things were awesome to me at that time. They were like full of flavor, higher alcohol, like just popping with flavor. And now I drink a lot more sparkling and white wine than I do red wine. Red wine for me is almost exclusively done with food, with the exception of some lighter reds like Pinot Noir, Blaufränkisch, Weigelts, and Tempranillo. But yeah, so it's good. And it's like, but I don't dislike oaky because I like oak. Oak is a good, like, I drink bourbon, so obviously I like oak, right? Like, you can't drink bourbon and be like, I don't like oak, because that's what bourbon is. Bourbon's all about the oak. And like, there's just a difference too between like an artificially oaky, buttery, not super well made California Chardonnay versus like a Merceau. But like a decent entry level Merceau is like $70 in a retail shop. So like you really got to double down on high quality oaky Chardonnay, right? Like that's tricky. It's tricky. And same thing I would do for food too. Like you just make it with food. Let's see. Anything I would suggest similar to that? So similar to Quilt, yeah, I really like the banana wines. Matt is a winemaker from Dayton, Ohio, and he makes a Napa Cab. I think it's probably within a couple dollars of Quilt. Fairly small production, does a lot of sourcing. He's a good guy. His dad still lives in Dayton, so it's like a local connection. I think stylistically the wines are very similar. There's a little bit of a local touch, and that's like kind of the thing for me. We don't have a ton of wine making influence in southwestern Ohio. We have some investor groups here in Cincinnati that have some wineries, but yeah, not a ton of like local connection. Bonanno, which is also Matt Fritz, the Patricia Green Cellars in Oregon. Brewer Clifton used to be owned by the Scripps family, but now it's not. I don't think they own it. I think now they own a distillery downtown instead. Yeah, it's like not a ton of local stuff. We'll see though. Maybe Emilio Estevez will bring all his California friends out here, and we'll opportunity to get more influence as they come make movies here. Oh, let's see. But yeah. I feel like my shade has been changing. I feel like my nose is glowing when I'm trying to talk now. I don't know how to get out of this thing. My porch faces west, as you can tell by the light change.
So one more question.
Let's see.
That's it. J Matt. Food pairings aside, what would you say your favorite red and white wines are?
For pairing?
No, not with pairings. Food pairings aside.
Like just to drink all the
Yep.
time? Probably my favorite white wine is Gruner Veltliner, and that is largely a personal thing. I've been to Austria. I have Austrian family. My last name Island things where my great-grandfather came from Nickelsdorf, and Dorf, as you all know, because you speak excellent German, means village. And then I can drink Tempranillo every single day of my life and never be sad, whether it's with food, like without food. It's such a versatile grape, and yeah, I got a really bad for Tempranillo. It's like really stunning, like really stunning. Yeah, those are also good food wines, though. So you know, it is what it is. It like that all kind of helps too.
Definitely.
Yeah. Let's see here. Those are good questions, though. And I think it's fun. You know, a lot of people in Cincinnati, a lot of the wine shops were really good about, they're really good about like tastings, you know, and like go on a Friday night, give us $6 and we'll let you taste 4 wines. Like, I think that's the best way to kind of explore and, you know, kind of figure out what you like, and things will change. I'm going to put my Instagram on here too. And now that you can spell my name, you can find me on the Facebook too if you want. I'm happy to friend everybody. There's the occasional picture of a cute baby, but it's mainly food and beverage related. But yeah, so that's cool. I'm so glad you all did this again. Hopefully it's working for you. I think this is now the unmute everybody like wild part of the night, you know, where like everybody just gets at it. Because I know we're also losing people as they've had their experience thus far.
You're not losing us. J-Matt. Ah, look at all the good people on here still.
I know. I'm loving it. Yeah, I'm not going to go anywhere from this porch until I know the kids are asleep. I don't want to do that. It's not my job tonight.
I don't see me.
Yeah, so I mean, like, so realistically, you know, this is the whatchamacallit, the JMAT lesson of wine is if you can care about it as much as you care about your food, if you can care about it as much as your craft beer or your craft cocktail, you're going to find that you buy less wine at a grocery store, and you're going to join a couple wine clubs, and you're going to probably go to an independent wine shop, and you'll have a better experience in the long run. But it'll require effort, you know? Like, I make excellent risotto now, and I've tried 7 different rices. That's a lot of effort, and now we got it locked in, you know? Same thing with wine, same thing with food, same thing with beer. All this Epicurean stuff is fantastic, and I don't know. That's what I'm into. I don't have lots of stuff. I have a lot of books, a lot of wine glasses.
Okay, so like we're really interested in the attempt to revive Ohio winery. We know about Miranda Nixon and other wineries out there along the Ohio River. And there was a winery culture here once before it was wiped out. Have you tasted the Norton wine? ?
I've had several Norton grapes made from as far north as Pennsylvania and as far south as Virginia. And yeah, the thing about the Vitis Lambrusca wines is that they're generally considered foxy. So I don't think they're bad at all. I just think that they're a little bit unique. And again, for me, you can put that with the right food and it would maybe be more interesting. You know, like, so my father is retired, he's a veteran, and he has an armory. And he tells me the armory is for his hunting pursuits. But really, I think he's a little bit crazy and scared of the government. But like when he is killing, you know, when he's harvesting deer or duck or pheasant, you know, he lets me know. And when he comes into town, I have wines that are really good with those things. And those types of things would go good with Norton. Those types of things would go with Bacchus Noir. And Catawba would go really well with like some local game hen, but like it doesn't go good with like the chicken breast at Kroger. It doesn't. It just doesn't shake out that way. It doesn't go, with Chef Boyardee, who, by the way, is he's not from Ohio, but he made his fame in Cleveland. If you didn't know, by the way, Chef Boyardee is a big deal in Cleveland. And his name is actually Boyardee. It's an Italian name, but we have SpaghettiOs and whatnot. And those things are great. And I think that it's, again, what's your expectation? All 50 states make wine. I would probably say that a half dozen of those make really awesome wine. Obviously, the West Coast, Washington, Oregon, California lead the way. The East Coast, New York State and Virginia make fantastic wines. Arizona makes fantastic wines. Everybody else is trying to figure out what works for them. Texas makes a lot of wine, and some of it's really good. New Mexico makes a lot of wine. Some of it's okay. I mean, hopefully you all have seen like Goulet. It's like a sparkling wine. It's not bad. It's not bad at all. But again, though, like if everybody's trying to be Napa, but none of us have Napa's climate, it won't work. You can't. All right, so when I was a sommelier of a restaurant in northern Kentucky, which will remain nameless, there was a winery which will remain nameless that you could drive to in 30 minutes from Covington. And we poured their Cabernet Sauvignon by the glass. We also poured an Italian Cabernet Sauvignon by the glass and Silver Oak by the glass. And the Kentucky one, we bought so much of it, it probably is still there, and I haven't worked there in 5 years. And it's not because the winery wasn't doing everything right. They were trying to grow Cabernet in northern Kentucky, and the weather doesn't work for it. Cabernet gets ripe too early, and with the heat in the summers of Kentucky, and you were all living just north of Kentucky, or some of us are in Kentucky, like it doesn't cool off at night. That's the problem. It's not the 100-degree afternoon. It's the 75-degree overnight. That's what makes the grapes fail in this part of the country. We talked about that Van Duzer corridor, like cutting through and cooling that part of Oregon off. Totally happens. Most of eastern Washington is 100 degrees at 4 p.m. and 50 degrees at midnight. That's what makes great wine in Washington. It's not, sure, it's the dirt. It's the dirt. It's always the dirt. It's the terroir, but it's not. If you can't get hot and cold, you don't stress the grapes enough and the vines enough. And if you have to irrigate things, it's too easy on the plant to create complexity and subtlety. That's how that works. So, yeah, it's like people. Like many of us are parents, and we always wanted everything to go perfectly, but we also knew simultaneously that every great challenge that was overcome made for a better human being down the road, right? Like that's the whole crux of parenting. I want super smooth life, then you end up with very boring adult children that don't know how to handle problems. But if you let them fail a lot, then they get really good at things, right? Hypothetically, hopefully, in most cases. And, they become like great successful adults. That's the same thing with a grapevine. Like if you're going to water it every Tuesday at 8 a.m., 2 liters, it's never going to work to find water. That's not very interesting for the grapevine. It's interesting in our culture of agricultural where things are becoming so monolithic, right? Like how many different types of banana species have you all tried? Yeah, whatever Chiquita makes, right? That used to be a Cincinnati company too, right? Until Linder sold it off about 6 years ago. But like, how many types of apples? Like I've at least had like 20 or 30 sets of apples, and at least like a half dozen from Ohio, right? Like Ohio's a good apple state, right? I'm trying to think of other fruits and vegetables where I've had a variety of species, right? You all know peppers, bell peppers, they change colors when they get ripe, right? We talked about that back in December, right? So like green, orange, yellow, and red is all one. It doesn't count as 4, just so you know. But like, so I got peppers and apples and grapes are really maybe tomatoes a little bit too, with heirlooms and different styles, grape, cherry, etc. But like, I don't know. There's red onion, yellow onion, white onion. There are 2 or 3 types of potatoes. I've only seen 1 type of banana. I don't know if there's different kinds of avocados. right? They just come in different sizes and ripenesses depending on what day of the week I'm there. So grapes are like really the last hyper diverse agricultural product. There are thousands of types of grape varieties in production.
So we really enjoy learning about the history of wine in the country and the background of Norton and how it evolved along with the Cynthiana grape, and then how Longworth, like the I'm sorry, I've had too much wine already. But I mean, there's wine in this country, but it's obvious that if you grow grapes at the right latitude and longitude with the right amount of soil or whatever, we can have good wine all over the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly the point. The point is, it's not that you can't grow wine everywhere, although it'd be really hard at the equator. And the only continent that doesn't grow wine is Antarctica. Who knows? Who knows how things are trending? We'll see. But I mean, you just can't go with the basic French varieties that we all kind of grew up on, right? Like Cabernet Sauvignon doesn't grow great everywhere. Pinot Noir doesn't grow great everywhere. Sauvignon Blanc doesn't grow great everywhere. I was in a place in Hungary called Batasconia, and it's on this gigantic lake, and it was so hot. It felt like combining Phoenix weathers with Cincinnati's weather, because it was like extra hot, and then there was humidity depending on how high up the mountain you were. And like Hungary's had a really long history of growing wine. You know, the Huns, you remember the Huns, right? You learned about them. You're studying Roman history and the Huns took over, right? That's where Hungarians come from. And they were basically trying to figure out what they could grow. They had these beautiful hilltops on this great lava flow, like real, like 1,000-year-old roads that hadn't broken down, because that's how old this part of the world is. But like, it's so hot there now, like they can't grow things that you would typically know the names of. So they're looking into like really obscure grapes from Greece and places, and like maybe they can grow a Certico there and make world-class Certico. But the Sauvignon Blanc is really bad. I had half a glass, to be real honest with you. But Sauvignon Blanc sells because people know what it is. People know what Cab is. People know what Pinot is. People know what Chardonnay is. It's tough. You know, we talked about, I think at the dinner, a lot of wine's expenses and real estate costs. Let's say the UnCorked group wants to buy a vineyard in Napa. I'm in. I'll be the main consultant and salesperson, right? And all right, so it's, you know, $1 million an acre, and it costs $500,000 to plant it, and we need another $500,000 to build a winery, and then you guys have to pay me a lot of money, and then I also need to travel around selling the wine. So we got to charge $100 a bottle, whether it's good or bad, don't we? So a lot of times when you find good values in wine, it comes from people that are like, oh, I'm the 5th generation. We don't have any real estate costs left. We need to pay our taxes. We need to make sure we have a rainy day fund, and we, you know, we can do those types of things. But it's tough. I mean, like
locally, the Niagara and the Catawba grape grow really easily, but
they do.
Cabernet Franc grows well.
Yes.
And Cabernet Franc is a pretty cool mixer.
Hey, Cabernet Franc all by itself is beautiful all over the world too, particularly in the Loire Valley in France, as well as Napa. And there's some really great examples also in Washington, for sure. Cabernet Franc is one of my personal favorites. Most people don't dig it. It's a little bit green, a little like green peppery. So yeah, let's see. Yes, avocados from Mexico, probably. Probably. Yeah. Cool. All right.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, if there's no other questions, we're a little past 7:30 now. We can go ahead and wrap this up. J-Matt, thank you so much. This has been great.
It's good to see everybody again.
Yeah, same to you.
Yeah, hopefully we can do it in a few months in person.
Yes, hopefully.
Exactly.
Yeah. And just to mention, as we start to wrap some things up, again, a video recording of this virtual tasting will be available to you all within the next couple of days. And then also, just to give everyone a heads up, we will be having our next virtual tasting on Wednesday, August 19th. With Urban Stead Cheese, who will be providing a wine and cheese Bearcat package for UnCorked. So be on the lookout for those details.
Is it Scott? Is Scott doing it? Scott's the man.
Yep. Yep.
Well,
Scott and Andrea are going to do it. Yeah, they're great. Well, like I said, if there's no other questions, again, thank you, J-Matt. This was great.
My pleasure entirely. I'm signing off, everybody. We'll see you later.
Yes. Yep. Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for joining in.
Thanks. Cheers.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Good to see everybody virtually. Go
Cheers.
Cats.
Go Cats.
Ruthie. Ruthie is very happy.
There we go. Cheers.
Cheers.